The CDC doesn't deploy response teams for towns with 300 people. And we definitely don't deploy them for towns with 0. That was the first thing I said when the duty officer woke me at 3:11 in the morning. "Run the census registry again," I told her. "You're looking at an outdated entry." "We already did," she replied, 3 times. A case file appeared on my laptop screen. A rural clinic had triggered an automated surveillance alert. 32 patients in 72 hours reporting the same symptoms: fever, confusion, and sudden memory disruption. Normally, that kind of cluster meant influenza or contaminated water. But the part that got attention wasn't the illness. It was the location. Bell Hollow Community Clinic population listed in the Federal Registry. 0. I frowned. Ghost town? "That's what the census database says," the officer replied. "Depopulated after a mining collapse in 1988. Then why is a clinic submitting patient reports? That's the question. I opened the attached intake records. The clinic had submitted dozens of patient charts through the national reporting system. Names, birth dates, temperatures, oxygen levels. Everything looked legitimate, except none of the patients existed. The system automatically checks federal and state ID databases when records are submitted. Normally, a mismatch means a typo, but every patient returned the same result. No match found. I scrolled to the physician's notes. The most recent entry had been typed just a few hours earlier. Patients insist they have lived here for years. None appear in state records. I leaned back in my chair. "How many patients now?" 37, the officer said, "and the town still lists 0 residents." "Yes." A pause hung on the line. Then she added something that made my stomach tighten. "The doctor reported a new symptom tonight." "What symptom?" "Patients are starting to notice." "Notice what?" Her voice dropped slightly. "That according to the government, they don't exist." By sunrise, a field team had been assembled. 5 of us in an unmarked CDC vehicle heading toward coordinates that barely appeared on the map. 2 hours into the drive, our signal disappeared completely. Not weak, just gone. Even the navigation tablet stopped loading map data, leaving only a blue dot drifting across a gray screen. Mallory, the state health liaison, stared at her laptop. "The county registry is strange," she said. She turned the screen toward us. Every property in Bell Hollow had the same status: unverified occupancy. We rounded a bend in the road then, and the town appeared in the valley below. Lights glowed in the windows. Smoke drifted from chimneys. Cars lined the streets. It looked like a normal small town, except there wasn't a single person outside. No movement, no sound. Just buildings, waiting. Reynolds slowed the vehicle as the clinic came into view. The parking lot was full. 24 cars sat neatly in the spaces outside the building, engines cold, doors closed. But the lights inside the clinic were on. I stared at the vehicles. "If the town has no residents," I said quietly, "then who drove those here?" No one answered, because by then we had all realized the same thing. Every car in that parking lot had arrived for an appointment, and according to the census, none of the drivers existed. The clinic doors unlocked with a soft click when Reynolds tried the handle. The bell above the entrance chimed brightly as we stepped inside. The sound echoed through the room longer than it should have. The waiting area looked normal at first glance: rows of plastic chairs, a muted television in the corner, a children's play table scattered with wooden blocks. But the chairs weren't empty. They were full of things. A jacket draped over one seat, a purse sitting open on another, a pair of reading glasses resting on a folded newspaper. Half-finished cups of water and coffee sat on the side tables. It looked like a room where people had stood up at the same time and simply walked away. Mallory stepped toward the reception desk. "Hello?" she called. Her voice carried down the hallway toward the exam rooms. No answer. Behind the counter sat a clipboard with a sign-in sheet attached. The pen was still uncapped. I leaned over the desk and looked down. The page was full. Names, birth dates, symptoms. 37 entries. The last one had been written less than 15 minutes ago. Someone was here recently, I said. Klein glanced toward the hallway. Then where are they? Sato moved slowly between the chairs, examining the belongings left behind. Phones, he said quietly. We looked closer. Several smartphones lay on the seats beside jackets and bags, unlocked, screens still glowing faintly. No one leaves their phone behind unless they plan to come back in a minute. Reynolds walked to the clinic door and looked out through the glass. The cars are still there, he said. Nobody left the lot. A soft mechanical sound broke the silence. We all turned. The printer behind the reception desk had started up. It whirred slowly, feeding a sheet of paper forward. Then another. Mallory stepped around the counter and lifted the first page. Her expression tightened. These are intake forms, she said. Fresh patient paperwork had printed automatically from the clinic system. Name, birth date, symptoms. Mallory flipped to the top line and read it again more slowly. Reynolds, Mercer, Sato. My stomach dropped. They were our names. One form for each member of the team. Klein grabbed the final sheet from the tray. At least they made a mistake, he muttered. We all looked at him. Why? I asked. He pointed to the bottom of the page. The field labeled Reason for Visit had already been filled in. In plain typed letters, the system had entered the same phrase on every form. Exposure event. Behind us, down the quiet hallway of exam rooms, a door creaked open. None of us had touched it. And from somewhere deeper in the clinic, we heard something else. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. Like someone had been waiting for us to arrive. The footsteps stopped before we reached the hallway. We waited. No one appeared. Reynolds raised a hand for silence and stepped forward first, flashlight cutting a narrow beam down the corridor even though the overhead lights were already on. Exam rooms lined both sides. Every door stood half open. Hello? Mallory called again. Nothing answered. We checked the first room. Empty exam bed, fresh paper on the roll, a blood pressure cuff still hanging beside the chair. The second room looked the same. So did the third. It felt wrong, not abandoned, not chaotic. Everything was clean, organized. Paused. Like the staff had stepped away mid-shift. Sato stopped outside a small office near the end of the hall. Security, he said. Inside was a computer and a bank of small monitors showing the clinic's camera feeds. Reynolds leaned over the keyboard and tapped the mouse. The system woke immediately. The screens showed the same empty waiting room we'd just walked through. Let's see earlier today, I said. Reynolds scrubbed back through the footage. The waiting room appeared again, this time full. People sat in the chairs, a mother with a child, an older man coughing into his sleeve, a nurse behind the desk checking paperwork. 37 patients. Exactly the number from the intake sheet. For several minutes, everything looked normal. People shifted in their seats, someone flipped through a magazine. A nurse called a name and guided a patient down the hallway. Then something changed. One woman near the center of the room stopped moving. She looked around slowly. Then another patient turned. Then another. Within seconds, the entire waiting room had gone still. Everyone seemed to be staring at something we couldn't see. Klein leaned closer to the screen. What are they looking at? No one answered. On the monitor, the first woman stood up. Not in panic, not in confusion, just calm. She walked to the door and stepped outside. Then the man beside her stood. Then the mother with the child. One by one, every patient in the room quietly rose and walked out of the clinic. No one spoke. No one ran. Within 90 seconds, the waiting room was completely empty. Reynolds froze the video. "That's impossible," Mallory whispered. I stared at the timestamp in the corner of the screen. The footage had been recorded 12 minutes ago. "Check the parking lot camera," I said. Reynolds switched feeds. The lot looked exactly as we'd seen it when we arrived. 24 cars sitting in neat rows, engines cold, doors closed. No one leaving, no one arriving. Klein pointed at the monitor. "Wait!" In the reflection of the clinic windows, something moved across the glass. A shape passed behind the camera's view. Tall. Human. But the parking lot itself remained completely empty. Mallory's voice came out barely above a whisper. "If they walked outside..." I finished the thought for her. Then where did they go? We left the security office and moved deeper into the clinic. If 37 patients had walked out of the building, there should have been some trace. Voices outside, engines starting, something. But the town remained completely silent. Sato stopped at the reception computer and began pulling up the clinic database. Patient records filled the screen. Not just today's cases. Years of them. "Look at the timestamps," he said. I leaned closer. The clinic had been operating continuously for nearly a decade. Thousands of visits logged, checkups, injuries, flu cases, routine prescriptions. It looked like the medical history of a perfectly normal small town. Except for one thing. None of the patient IDs matched anything outside Bell Hollow. No driver's licenses, no insurance records, no social security matches. Mallory crossed her arms. "That's impossible. You can't run a clinic without identity verification." "Apparently you can," Klein muttered. Sato scrolled further. "Here," he said. A series of entries had been flagged with physician notes. They appeared every few years. Same symptoms, same language. I read one aloud. "Patient reports seeing additional people in reflective surfaces." Another entry. "Multiple residents claiming population numbers feel wrong." Sato opened the most recent flagged chart. It belonged to the clinic physician. The note had been written early that morning. "Residents are beginning to notice discrepancies in records. Several patients have questioned why no state systems recognize them." My chest tightened. Mallory leaned over the desk. "What happens after that?" Sato scrolled down. The final line in the doctor's log read, "Symptoms worsen once residents become aware of the population discrepancy." "Worsen how?" Reynolds asked. Sato pointed to the next entry. It wasn't medical. It was a population note. "Town census, 312. Then the next day's entry. "Town census, 289. Another. "Town census, 203. The numbers kept dropping. Fast. Klein frowned. "Are they dying?" "No," I said quietly, because the security footage had already shown us what happened. "They're leaving." Mallory shook her head. "Leaving where?" No one answered. Sato slowly leaned back from the computer. "There's another note." He highlighted the final line in the physician's log. "When enough residents realize they do not exist in official records, they begin to disappear." Silence filled the room. Reynolds broke it first. "That's not a disease." "No," Sato said. "It's awareness." I looked toward the clinic windows at the quiet street outside. 37 patients had walked out of this building minutes before we arrived. And according to the doctor's records, they hadn't died. They had simply stopped existing. Mallory exhaled slowly. So the town had 312 people this morning. I nodded. And now? No one needed to check the database, because somewhere outside in the empty streets of Bell Hollow, the population had already begun to drop again. And we had just learned the reason why. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The clinic computer screen still displayed the population log the doctor had kept, a neat column of numbers dropping year after year whenever the symptoms appeared. Eventually, the entries stopped. The final number was 118. Mallory folded her arms. If this has happened before, why hasn't anyone outside noticed? I gestured toward the screen. Because according to every federal system, the town doesn't exist. Sato leaned closer to the window, staring out at the quiet street. If the records erase them, he said slowly, then once they disappear, there's no evidence they were ever here. Pline rubbed the back of his neck. So the town resets itself? Not resets, Sato said. Shrinks. Reynolds checked his watch. We should leave. If people are disappearing. The printer behind the desk started again. All of us turned. Another sheet slid slowly into the tray. Then another. Mallory picked them up before anyone else could. Her face tightened as she read. These are updated intake forms. For who? Reynolds asked. Mallory turned the page so we could see. At the top was the same clinic header, but the number printed beside it had changed. Town population, 118. Below that was a list of patient names, 37 of them, all marked with the same status. Patient no longer present. Klein leaned over her shoulder. That's the exact number that walked out earlier. I stared at the page. Check the next line. Mallory flipped to the bottom. There was a new entry. Just one. Patient status. Active. The name beneath it made my chest tighten. Mercer. Eli. My name. Klein grabbed another sheet from the stack. Wait, there's more. He turned the page. Another active patient. Sato, Kenji. Another. Mallory, Pierce. The printer whirred again. One final sheet slid forward. Reynolds pulled it from the tray before anyone else could. He stared at it for a long second. Then he said quietly, It's counting us. Mallory looked back toward the window. Outside, the street still appeared empty. But something about the air felt different now. Heavier. Like a room after someone walks in. Sato slowly exhaled. The population isn't dropping anymore. I understood what he meant. The town had been losing residents all day. But now, the system had found replacements. Reynolds lowered the paper in his hand. On the top line, beside the clinic header, the number had changed again. Town population, 123. And somewhere outside the clinic walls, Bell Hollow had started growing again. Reynolds didn't argue anymore. We're leaving, he said, already moving toward the clinic door. No one objected. The printer tray still held the intake sheets with our names on them. The population counter now read 123. The town had started counting us. We stepped outside together. The air felt different than when we arrived. The same quiet streets, the same parked cars, but the silence wasn't empty anymore. It felt occupied. Mallory stopped first. Do you hear that? At first, I didn't. Then I did. Not voices. Breathing. soft, uneven breaths coming from somewhere beyond the parked vehicles. Reynolds scanned the street. "Show yourselves!" No response, but something shifted in the reflection of a storefront window across the road. I turned toward it. For a moment, the glass showed the 5 of us standing in the street. Then the reflection changed. The street behind us was full. Dozens of figures stood silently on the sidewalk in the reflection. Men, women, children. None of them were actually there. Pline stepped closer to the window. "They're not outside," he said. "They're only in the reflection." One of the reflected figures moved. A woman stepped forward in the glass. When she did, a parked car beside us creaked slightly, as if someone had leaned against it. Mallory's voice trembled. "They're still here." Sato nodded slowly. "They never left." I realized what had happened. The patients hadn't vanished when they walked out of the clinic. They had simply moved somewhere we couldn't see anymore. And now that the town had begun counting us as residents, they could see us. Another reflected figure stepped forward, then another. Soon the glass showed a crowd gathering behind us. Reynolds grabbed the SUV door and yanked it open. "Get in, now!" We piled inside as fast as we could. As Reynolds started the engine, I glanced once more at the storefront window. The reflected crowd had grown closer. Dozens of faces staring directly at us. Waiting. Reynolds slammed the accelerator and the SUV sped down the empty street. The figures in the reflection began walking after us. Not quickly, not urgently, just calmly, like residents heading home at the end of the day. Behind us, Bell Hollow had finally started filling back up, and now it knew exactly how many people it needed. We didn't stop driving until the navigation tablet finally reconnected to the network. It happened all at once. Signal bars appeared. The gray map filled back in. Roads, towns, and county borders snapped into place like nothing had ever been missing. Reynolds pulled onto the shoulder and shut off the engine. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then Mallory opened her laptop. "I'm checking the census registry again," she said. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. A few seconds later, she froze. "It's gone." "What is?" Reynolds asked. "Bell Hollow." She turned the screen toward us. The road we had just driven through still existed, but the town marker was gone. No municipal record, no property data, no clinic. Just forest and an unnamed road. Pline shook his head slowly. "That's not possible." But it was already happening to the rest of the records. The clinic database we had accessed earlier no longer appeared in the federal reporting system. The patient files were gone, like they had never existed. Sato leaned back in his seat. "The population corrected itself," he said quietly. I thought about the intake forms printing with our names, the counter changing, the reflected figures filling the streets. Mallory refreshed the census page again. One entry appeared briefly before the system updated. Just one. Bell Hollow. Population 118. Then it vanished, replaced with blank forest. No one spoke after that. 2 weeks later, I filed the official report. The CDC categorized the incident as a data irregularity linked to an abandoned medical reporting system. No further investigation required. Bell Hollow was removed from every active database. Officially, the town never existed. But sometimes, late at night, I still check the federal census registry. Most nights, the entry isn't there. Just empty woodland where the town should be. But once in a while, the system glitches. For a fraction of a second, a single line appears. Bell Hollow, population 119. And every time I see that number, I remember the intake forms printing inside the clinic. the ones that started counting us. Because the last time I checked the registry, the population wasn't dropping anymore. It was growing. If you enjoyed tonight's story, make sure to subscribe to Campfire Horror Stories for more strange reports, unexplained incidents, and accounts that never quite made it into the official records. Some places vanish from the maps. Some files disappear from the system. But every now and then, something slips through. A line of data that shouldn't exist, a location that was supposed to be erased, or a population number that keeps getting larger. So if you ever come across a town that doesn't appear on any map, but the lights are still on and the parking lot is full, you might want to keep driving. Because if Bell Hollow is still out there, it may still be looking for residents. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this one, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments what kind of incident we should investigate next. Until next time, stay safe out there, and make sure your name never shows up in the system.